Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Housing and Regeneration Scrutiny Panel meeting. We'll start off with introduction of everybody around the room. I am Khaled Mueed, Councillor for Knoll Park and also Chair of this panel.
I'm Dawn Barnes, Councillor for Crouch End.
Councillor Bob Hare for Highgate Ward.
Councillor Ruth Gordon, Tottenham Hale. Councillor Yvonne Say, Bounds Green.
Daniel Stone, Councillor for Stroud Green Ward.
I'm David Sherrington, Director of Broadwater Farm.
Dan Hawthorne, Director of Housing Regeneration and Planning.
Emma Williamson, the Assistant Director for Planning, Building Standards and Sustainability.
Rob Szosowski, Head of Planning Policy, Transport and Infrastructure.
And I'm Dominic O'Brien, Scrutiny Officer.
Thank you. We're also expecting Councillor Kirsten Hearn, who is on her way. Actually, she is about to enter the room. So there is a Q&A session with her. When she comes in, takes a seat, I will introduce her. Before we proceed any further, there is this blurb about filming at meetings that I must read out. So please note that this meeting may be filmed or recorded by the Council for live or subsequent broadcast via the Council's internet site or by anyone attending the meeting using any communication method. Although we ask members of the public recording, filming or reporting on the meeting not to include the public seating areas, members of the public attending the meeting should be aware that we cannot guarantee that they will not be filmed or recorded by others attending the meeting. Members of the public participating in the meeting, for example, making deputations, asking questions, making oral protests, should be aware that they're likely to be filmed, recorded or reported on. By entering the meeting room and using the public seating area, you are consenting to being filmed and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings. The Chair of the meeting has the discretion to terminate or suspend filming or recording if, in his or her opinion, continuation of the filming, recording or reporting would disrupt or prejudice the proceedings, infringe the rights of any individual, or may lead to the breach of a legal obligation by the Council. Thank you. Do we have any apologies for absence, possibly from Dominic? Have we received an apology? No apologies received. We haven't. Okay. Councillor Kirsten Hearn has joined us, so welcome to the meeting. We don't have any urgent business. Okay. Any declarations of interest from any member of the panel? No. We have a deputation, so we will move to that. Paul and Jacob, if you could kindly take your seats. So we've allocated 15 minutes for your deputation. So if you could kindly introduce and say what it is, and then allow for the panel members to ask some questions if they need any clarification. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and good evening, everybody. This deputation concerns the converted properties cleaning service charge, which was introduced in 2018 for tenants, and the Council has now accepted that most of the tenants received no service at all in the first year of the service charge, and also that in the second year of the service charge, the tenants had to pay the leaseholder contribution as well as their own, while the leaseholders, of course, paid as well. We want to talk about some of the reasons why this has happened and what we can do about it. Now, we've spent so much time and bother about service charges in particular because service charges are an increasingly significant but unacknowledged part of gross rent, and they're a significant cause of poverty. And so they get forgotten about. So something like the shelter report that's come out called The Capital in Crisis, it's a really important report about rents. It backs up 100% what this council's done over rent policy, supporting social rent rather than mayor's rent. And then there's a gap in it, because it talks about rent and whether people can pay the rent, but there's no mention of service charges. Most of the people that they're quite rightly so concerned about will be paying service charges as well as rent. And so, why do we have increased service charging? Well, we have it partly because government is preventing other ways of funding the housing service, and partly because government has encouraged local authorities and housing associations to use more service charges in the last 20 years, basically. And so, just looking now at this particular service charge and what happened, as far as we know, it was introduced in 2018. The Cabinet was given inaccurate information about it. The Cabinet was told that this was an existing service that tenants had not been charged for. It wasn't. It was a new service, as far as we know, introduced without any consultation. The council was then, or Homes for Haringey, unable to deliver any service to the majority of the tenants who were being charged for it. And then when you go into year 2, there was an increase in the service charge of 89%. And this happened for two separate reasons. The first one is that the council argued that for 4 of the 6 service charges introduced in 2018, 6 new service charges, 4 of them, they said that they'd made a mistake and miscalculated the number of tenants receiving the service, that the number of tenants receiving the service was lower than they had thought, and therefore the tenants had to pay more. And this is a Alice in Wonderland argument, quite frankly, because if there's less work to do, why should the tenants have to pay more money? It doesn't, in order to match the budget. It doesn't make any sense. Value for money going right out the window. So that's something we're really concerned about there. And the other reason why the increase happened is because of paying the leaseholder contribution. Now, this was something that Homes for Haringey officers raised with the council officers. Council officers at one point agreed that they wouldn't do it, and then they broke the agreement, as far as we know. And I've emailed members of the panel the evidence where we can see that happened. And then we have year 3, which is the year we're about to enter, 2020 to 21, where the council then has agreed about the things that have gone wrong in the last 2 years. Most of the tenants are getting some money back. There's one small group who we think ought to get some money back that's not yet been agreed, and that's been, that can be looked at. But the big major thing is that it appears that overcharging is taking place again in 2020. 21, where once again the tenants are paying the leaseholder contribution as well as their own, and there's one action we want you to take. Guess what? It's please take a look at that and make sure that doesn't happen. If that was not the case, the other possible alternative, which might be true, is that for some reason there's been a need to have a 47% increase in the budget and a 47% increase in service charge. But nobody has been told what that reason might be, and we don't believe that is the case. And then just finally, I'll say that next month, a new challenge is coming along for the council, which is a new regulatory regime that the regulator for social housing, that in the past concerned itself only with housing associations, is going to regulate local authorities. There is a rent standard, there is a government rent document as well, which specifies certain minimum standards regarding service charges, consultation on new service charges, an obligation to keep the costs to residents down, including maximum increases of, or not maximum preferred increases, as it were, of whatever it's called, CPI plus 1%. And these are standards that Haringey, as it stands, is not meeting at all. I had a look at my tenancy agreement, which is revised by the council in 2011. I was horrified to read it, to be honest. What it says over rent and service charges, you'll get no consultation, we'll just tell you what to pay. No mention of what is going to be service charged, no mention of any control over any new service charges that might be introduced, no mention of any what the amounts might be, no mention of any what excess increases at all. And we don't believe that having no consultation is good practice. We also, and again this is finally, before I shut up, that there's an equalities issue here, which we put in our response to the budget consultation this year. It turned up in the reports pack that every councillor had, simply that when council tenants and resident households on council estates are not consulted, specifically not selected as it were, not to be consulted, there's a serious equalities issue there. You don't need me to spell it out. It's quite clear which kinds of groups are being disadvantaged. In other words, poorer groups and ethnic minorities have been disadvantaged. There has been no response whatsoever from officers or councillors to those comments. But these are the kind of issues that are going to come forward. And, okay, if I may, Chair, just for another sentence, which is that I've been sorry to be so negative, because these are criticisms. We criticise, however, with a purpose. These are issues where, if we get them right, we can change things, we can demand changes from others, and we can take on the kind of people that are running the government of this country and start to combat poverty and serve the people that I know you're elected to represent. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Typically, we only allow 3 minutes for this bit, but I've allowed you 7 minutes. It's because, you know, you were on a flow. I just didn't want to stop you. As a panel members, I can already see Councillor Hare. You've got a question that you want to ask. Is there anybody else? It would be good just to see. Okay, far away.
It's just a clarification, Paul. Thank you very much for all of that, which is really clear. But I missed something. There was another reason, as well as equalities. Towards the end, it was the equalities issue you raised. You raised another one just before that, and I missed it. About the consultation on new service charges, and you mentioned something, and then you said it's also an equalities issue. So I just wondered, I missed the something. I'm very sorry.
I'm sorry, Bob, I'm still not quite sure. The regulation is the really important thing. So regulation is coming in next month. The standards that are set, Haringey is not going to meet at the moment. It includes our tenancy agreements, which are very poor on this issue. Those were the points I made as far as I remember.
Councillor Gordon.
Thanks, yeah. I can see that you've been corresponding on this matter since early February, I think maybe even before then, from last year. And can you just tell us what responses you've had either from officers or cabinet members or Homes for Haringey?
Yes, we did a big piece of work on this for the 2019 review of charges, and following that I then put in freedom of information request. Got a huge amount of really useful information about how the decisions are being made. But I mean, what was really shocking is the fact that there was a disengagement by the council to us. So even though we did deputations to the cabinet and to full council, our questions were not answered accurately, or in some cases not answered at all. The only way to find out what the council's position was to do freedom of information requests. So that was, you know, really difficult, though perhaps not too surprising. And then just add that this year, what would really be helpful would be if cabinet members would respond to correspondence. There was a generalised problem last year, which I raised with the governing party's chief whip, but the situation hasn't really changed at all. It would be really helpful if correspondence was to be answered by the cabinet members, as it is answered by officers. Officers do answer in a much more timely manner, but we want to talk to both, really, and obviously mainly to the people who make the decisions.
Councillor Stone.
Hi, Paul. Thanks. Perhaps I just missed this, but and if I'm getting it wrong, please tell me I am, but did you said that tenants are paying where leaseholders are not, or that tenants are paying some contributions more than what they should be, that leaseholders aren't paying those contributions? And if you did say that, could you explain a little bit more about how that works, or how that's come to be in your view?
Yes, my view is that the council's actions have been divisive. I think, to be honest, I think they've been deliberately divisive over a period of time. And there are many times when leaseholders get billed for tenant repairs, for example, when they should not be billed for that. And then in this particular case, we've had a situation where the tenants have been billed for the leaseholder contribution as well as their own. Now, the leaseholders have also been billed. I mean, this is absolute chaos here, and I personally don't think that it's about it's a matter of incompetence. We all make mistakes sometimes, but I don't think this is driven by incompetence. I think it's a revenue-driven service. I mean, I think to introduce a service charge when you're not able to deliver the service for a whole year indicates that you're more interested in the revenue than you are in providing a service to the customers. That's the first thing that's got to change.
Yeah, I mean, on the face of it, if you read all of the email trails, it might look like a series of mistakes, and we're not here to sort of schadenfreude or whatever the word is about mistakes. But what we're more concerned about is that actually they were there's a danger that things like this aren't really mistakes, that with service charges and other charges that have been brought in, it is an attempt to create a surplus, and that some of the laxness about getting it right and making sure we're only charged for services we actually receive may be because there's a general corporate spirit that really is just about bringing the money in, rather than this slightly dubious idea that we needed this particular service charge, that the tenants concerned needed this particular service in the first place. We're worried about this, and we think that there needs to be there needs to be a review really of how service charges are levied in the first place, whether there is a need for a service charge, and also a review into the decisions about how they are increased. And, thirdly, if that all goes through, a review, scrutiny about whether the service is being provided, whether what's being charged for is actually being provided. We think this is the role of a scrutiny committee, because it just seems really like that otherwise, unless we're here to sort of pull everyone to account, we're not going to be here forever, we could go or leave or die or something like that, then this process will just carry on of ramping up the service charges on people in an unfair and arguably unlawful way.
Okay, so I've got a question from Councillor Barnes and then a quick one from Councillor Gordon, because we are coming to the end of the time allocated for this part. So if you go to Councillor Barnes and then Councillor Gordon.
So I just wanted to ask you, you mentioned that there's a new regulator for social housing, or it exists, but it will now look after council homes as well. So have you asked questions of the council as to whether or not they're prepared for that? And would it make sense to look at that in conjunction with these changes? Because if there are going to be changes to service charges and what can be charged and so on, then we could look at that in one whole bunch, which would make more sense. And then the retrospective ones, I've got residents who've been charged for services they've not had as well, which we've taken up. And I think I've spoken with Alan about one of those at one point. So I've had almost personal experience.
Just point of... Oh, sorry.
We are going to take two questions.
So just for the sake of clarity, for the 2020-2021 year, you're estimating that it should be £1.11 per week, and at the moment the charge is still at £1.77 per week. So there's still a discrepancy that we are going into a future year. Is that correct? And that's just a sort of basic question of clarity. And I'm thinking that we should have either special item agenda on this, where if there's no officers that can, I don't see any officers wanting to come in to answer these points, either from Homes for Haringey or our own housing. And if they're not going to answer here and now, could we have a special item on the agenda, or maybe a sort of like one-day review? I'm not sure whether that's what Councillor Barnes was suggesting.
With the new legislation.
It might well be worth, having something, a larger item on that, with all the relevant officers that can answer the questions here.
Before I hand over to you, Paul, because we are almost towards the end, or in fact we've gone slightly over for the time allocated for this. So if you could kindly address those two questions, and also just make your concluding remarks in terms of what you would like us to take forward, and if there is a response that you would like us to get for you, please do tell us as well.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the questions and discussion. I think the issue of the regulator is really important. I think that's a bit of a wake-up call to Haringey, and I have written to Amina Ibrahim suggesting that it's looked at in that way as an opportunity to improve the standards, including the input of residents into the way that the service is managed. So that's really important. So the issue of the next year's charge, helpfully, because our tenancy agreements are so awful, it says that the council can change the service charge at 1 week's notice. So having adopted this charge, which is not so good, they can introduce a better one at 1 week's notice, and we'd encourage you to do that. If you read the stuff, obviously it's a bit detailed and a bit nerdy, as it were, but if you read Simon Eversley's very helpful email, he says that for the current year, he says that the service charge should have been £1.20 a week, and the council has now decided to impose £1.77 for the next financial year, and that's 47% higher, without a word of explanation. Now, it's not a question of, even if there aren't going to be legal rights or enforceable contractual rights to consultation, there ought to be an explanation of why the council is doing what it is doing about every significant aspect of the council's work. And you can see that's just not happening in this particular situation. So there's a lot of catching up that needs to be done, and obviously we're always available to work with you to do that.
Okay, thank you very much. We will take that away, and as has been suggested, maybe it's also an agenda item in its own right in one of the future meetings, or even some form of scrutiny that we decide to do. So we'll have a think about that. And obviously, in terms of the response that you've had already from Homes for Haringey, I can see that there is already, still there is some gap, and you would like some further explanation and possibly a reversal of the increase in the service charge. So we'll make those representations as well. Okay, thank you. So we now move to the minutes of the last meeting, which are at pages 1 to 12. So if panel members, if you have any matters arising from those minutes, please indicate. Councillor Gordon.
There's a matter. There's a matters arising about. I've got two. One is about the CBS. I'm just wondering if we can have an update about who is now on the board of that organisation, and who does it report to within the council, and are there minutes of the meetings? Have they already started having meetings? What's the update on that? And then I've got another matters arising about the Tottenham Hale DCF. Do you want me to say that what it is now? So it's just, I'd really like to have an updated report on the Tottenham Hale DCF, but I'd sort of suggest that we have it as a future item, separate item, with Councillor Ajay present, because I've got some questions about the whole sort of district forum itself, really, because there's question marks about Ada College now and how that affects the Tottenham Hale regeneration programme per se. So I'd sort of asking really that we put that forward as a separate agenda item with the Cabinet member responsible for regeneration.
Can I also just remind everyone here that if you're going to use an acronym or an initial, I think it's advisable to say the thing in full first, because there are people watching at home that I know that it's kind of, we recognise all of the abbreviations. So you're first of all referring to the Community Benefit Society, CBS, and you're secondly referring to DCF, which is the District Centre Framework. So the second one, which is, as you've said, in Councillor Charles Adjier's portfolio. So what we'll do, we'll make a note of that, and we will probably bring that back as an agenda item, because he also comes and does a Q&A session. So that will be that. And in terms of the CBS, I think, is it something that you could address now? If not, we could get a written response. But it looks like we have Alan Benson that could respond to it now. Thank you.
Thank you. There were 3 questions about who's on the board, who does it report to within the council, and are the minutes publicly available. First question on the board. The board membership was confirmed at the last Cabinet paper on the CBS. I can't remember the exact date, but I think it might have been January or February. But to recap, I'm currently chair of the board, appointed by the council. The deputy chair is Denise Gandy, appointed by Homes to Haringey on behalf of the council. And the council has to be in a minority of board members for it to be seen as fully independent and to get FCA registration. The 3 independent board members at first we've appointed as the council and the CBS has had its first 2 board meetings and agreed at the last board meeting just last week that those 3 independents would be replaced within a maximum of 2 years by independently recruited board members recruited by the board who would have a local connection. The 3 people we appointed to the board at first are Mark Bayesians. He's the chair of the Tower Hamlets Community Benefit Society and did the options appraisal for us in setting it up and helped advise us on setting up the CBS. The second one is Mira Beddy. She's a local resident, lives in Haringey, but is the current director of housing delivery for Barnet Homes. And the third is Steve Beard, who works for Beacon Consultancy, who gave us all the financial advice in setting up the CBS. So we very much appointed 3 people independently who we know personally very well, and we know they will provide expertise in setting up the CBS. All of those 3, though, will be replaced on a rolling period over the next 2 years. But those replacements will be appointed by the board as a whole, not by the council, because it needs to be seen as independent. And that kind of answers your second question. The CBS doesn't effectively report to anyone in the council. It's an independent body and seen as independent of the council. I won't say the word controls, because you've got to be very careful not to use that word. Our influence over the CBS is very, very strong. The CBS, as it's set up, has very clear rules about what it can and cannot do. It can only provide services to people who are residents of Haringey or people nominated to it by Haringey. It has to take all the properties that we choose to lease to the CBS, so it can't choose not to take properties once the council decides to lease them, and those leases contain exact controls of what those properties can be used for, i.e. they have to take nominations of homeless people from Haringey. And there's no facility within the CBS to build up surpluses to start doing other things at all. So we have extremely strong influence over the CBS, both in its articles and in the agreements the CBS has signed with the council. In terms of its minutes, they don't get published publicly. It's an independent private organisation, so its minutes and agendas, etc., are for the organisation. It's not available to FOI, etc., either, because it's not a statutory public body. It's very much important to see it as an independent quasi-housing association that's accruing stock in the borough, and our controls over it aren't formal in terms of a direct control. They're very much through our arrangements, leases and nomination agreements with the CBS.
Thank you. Do we have any other matters arising from the minutes? If not, we will adopt these minutes as a true record of the last meeting that we had. And then we move to At this stage, we will vary the agenda slightly. We will take the agenda item 8, which is local plan, and that's going to be introduced by... okay, so we'll go to Rob to introduce the agenda item 8, and then after that we'll take Cabinet member questions.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I'm Rob Czosowski, Head of Planning Policy, Transport and Infrastructure. So the local plan, if you're not familiar, it's the main document used to determine planning applications and whether to grant or refuse, and shapes new development across the borough and new buildings. But it's more than that. It should set out a positive vision and a positive spatial framework for development across the borough, and it translates the council's wider corporate priorities into a spatial plan. But it's also important in allowing upfront community engagement with planning issues upfront, rather than just dealing with issues at a planning application stage. So we have an existing local plan that you'll be familiar with, adopted in 2017, which is made up of a number of documents called the strategic policies, the development management policies, site allocations, and the Tottenham Area Action Plan. So it's still relatively up to date, but we do need to keep on top of it and ensure that we keep it up to date. There's a legal requirement to think about updating it every 5 years, so to review it every 5 years. Obviously, things have changed since 2017. We have a new council administration. The market out there has changed, and the world's a different place. So we're looking at reviewing it and doing a new local plan. We can't do absolutely everything that we'd want to do. We have to work within parameters. So there are national parameters, so we have to work within national planning policy and guidance, and at the end of the process we have to go through a public examination where an independent inspector scrutinises what we do and makes sure that we're in check. And we also have to follow the London plan, so there's a new London plan about to be adopted by the Mayor of London, and that sets certain parameters for us to work within as well. And it's also very detailed, so we don't need to repeat absolutely everything that's in the London plan to save on space and time. But saying all of that, we do want to make sure the local plan does reflect what's special to Haringey and what's important to Haringey in terms of key planning policies. So that will be the main focus for the new local plan. So we'll look at structuring it based on the borough plan priorities, people, place, housing and economy, and drawing upon other council strategies as well, so not just the borough plan, but there's emerging work on a new housing strategy, economic development strategy, climate action plan, transport strategy. All of those things are relevant to the local plan, so it is very much a corporate plan. It's not just a planning policy thing. We have to have evidence base to support what we're doing, so we can't just sort of pluck things out the air. We have to have clear evidence base. So some of that is listed at the top of page 18 of your papers, that we will need to make sure we've got evidence to support what the council wants to do. And it needs to be robust evidence so that when we get through consultation and get to the examination stage at the end, that will stand up to scrutiny of an independent inspector that will be really testing us on the evidence. In terms of timescales, they're set out on page 19. We're a little bit behind due to other bits of work that we're working on, including an office to residential Article 4 direction, and we're getting some staff into place, but we're in a position to work on this in earnest and still stick to the overall timescales set out in there. So we're right at the beginning of the process, and we're looking at doing what we're going to call a first steps consultation this year, which will be enable lots of upfront engagement, ask lots of open questions, and allow people to comment on different options before we've even started to draft the policies. So it's important we do the engagement first before we actually start to draft the new local plan. There are risks to the delivery of the local plan. It's a sort of 2 to 3 year programme, so obviously lots of things change within that. They're set out at the bottom of page 19 of the report, but it's things like government reforms, so the government is always changing the goalposts on local plans and planning, and there is reform expected shortly, possibly announced in the budget coming soon this month nationally. Market uncertainty can affect what we can do in the local plan. Things like Crossrail 2 and announcements on Crossrail 2 and sites and how much development we can have in certain places has an impact. And there's also the importance of maintaining what we call a 5-year housing land supply, so making sure we have enough sites in the new local plan to show we can hit our housing target at least for the next 5 years. and that is a real challenge, making sure we've got enough sites. We appraise sustainability and environmental matters for every single policy as we go along throughout the whole process. That's really important and embedded in everything that we do. We will also be setting up a member working group as a kind of sounding board, an informal sounding board on the local plan. And this was discussed at Regulatory Committee last night, and that the idea is that Regulatory Committee members would act in that function of a sort of sounding group, a member working group on that, as Regulatory Committee already considers planning issues. And it's obviously public engagement is extremely important to the local plan, so there's not just one consultation on the local plan. There will be at least 3 stages of public consultation on that, so lots of opportunity for people to comment. And at the bottom of page 20, we've set out the types of things that we would do to make sure that the engagement is broad and part of the process. So that's my introduction, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Over to the panel members for any questions or anything that you would like Rob to clarify. Please indicate. Councillor Hare.
Obviously, Crossrail 2 is a really big, unclear factor at the moment. Very briefly, what is the process of clarification that you expect now on Crossrail?
Yep, so the main issue with Crossrail is that Transport for London has had powers to safeguard land, which means there's a bit of limbo on whether you can permanently develop a site or not. So we would seek clarity on exactly which sites will stay in the safeguarding, but the feelings that we've got are that there's going to be no announcement soon on that and no changes to the safeguarding. So it does limit what we can do on some sites, and that is an issue that we'll just have to deal with through the local plan.
Come back with a quick bit of clarity. There's 2 potential routes. I know the Council has a preference for one, TfL has a preference probably for another. Does that mean you're doubling up the number of sites that you're having to protect?
At the moment, that's the position from TfL. There's routes safeguarded for both routes, but we would look to refine that over time in discussion with TfL. But it's obviously in limbo at the moment. Lots of other national picture at the moment.
Just a question from me. And how does that affect your the timetable that you've set out? I mean, you don't currently expect to have any clarity before the end of that period in your timetable. Is that right?
We'll probably have some announcement within the time period before we get to the end of the local plan process. It's just a question of, is it early enough to shape what we're doing? But there's a whole number of issues, actually, that if we sit and wait for something to be confirmed, we'll never, ever get the local plan done. So it's just one of those things that we have to, go through and deal with these challenges and changes as we go along. So as a Crossrail 2 announcement comes along, we just have to deal with it as it comes in. Otherwise, there's so many other things that could be obstacles in the way that you would just never get round to doing it. So we just have to press ahead.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Gordon.
Yeah, thanks. In terms of the number of housing units that we're supposed to give permission to, the figure in my head is something like 1,958. Is that still the figure going forward? And if so, and could you maybe tell us what proportion we've managed to achieve of that in the last year? And a secondary question is about the number of sites we have available. Obviously, we've got a lot of built-up areas and not an enormous amount of land, I don't think, that is available. So will this push us to being more amenable to higher rise buildings?
Yep, so in terms of our latest target, so our housing target is set by the Mayor of London in the London Plan, and the London Plan that's about to be adopted, hopefully in the next few weeks, we're expecting the target to be 1,592 new homes per year. which is lower than the figure that you quoted, which was closer to the draft figure that was proposed a few years ago, and that has been dropped following consultation and following representations from Haringey Council and others in that the target was too high. So that has been responded to, and that's been good. So that is the latest figure. We're waiting for the Secretary of State to give his response to the London plan in the next few weeks to confirm that. So it's not 100% confirmed yet, but that is the latest figure that we're looking at. You asked the question about how many homes have we completed in the last year. So the last, we look at this on financial years, so up to March 2019 is the latest published figure we've got on that, and we completed 644 new homes in that time period, which is short of our existing target, which is 1,500. So we were short on that year, but in previous years we've been a bit closer. So the year previous to that was 1,200 completions, which was closer to the target. We do look forward over the next 5 years to see if we have got enough land and planning permissions and site allocations for housing to be able to meet our target going forward. And we do consider that we have a 5-year housing land supply to meet sufficient sites over the next 5 years. It's very close. We don't have a huge spare capacity on top of that, so it is tight, but we do consider that we have a 5-year housing land supply. And in terms of your question about density, I don't think it does mean that we need tall buildings everywhere or anything like that and super density. In some locations we will need that, and that's part of the discussion on the local plan, is where do people think is a good or a bad location for tall buildings and high density. And as you'll be familiar, high density doesn't necessarily always mean tall buildings. You can do high density at sort of medium rise. And these are all the very interesting issues that we'll need to discuss through the local plan and engage with the community on what they think about that.
Councillor Hare and then Councillor Barr.
There is obviously a clash between having land for homes and land for employment, and I'll be interested in a comment on that. Also, I know that the council or the planning service was very keen to have, if you like, a very clear map of the borough where high density would go in, and it would be in particular locations. And I wonder if you've still got that map in your minds, because you've just said we'll respond to where people think would be suitable.
Yeah, so in terms of homes versus employment, yes, that's a massive challenge for any local plan, and that's what planning is for, to balance the competing land uses between homes and jobs and employment uses. But there is lots of emerging and quite exciting new policy on things like industrial intensification and co-location. So that's about possibly where there's industrial land, allowing multi-storey industrial to make better use of the space and the scarce land that we have, and also co-location, which means having residential adjacent to industrial, obviously with the right environmental separations and all the relevant controls in place. But there's lots of emerging clever designs on how that can be done, and there's some good practice coming from across London on that. So we'll be looking at that issue. So that's the sort of balance of homes and jobs. But you're right, it's a challenge. And in terms of mapping the borough for density and things like that, so yes, we have at the moment in the existing local plan, there's some policies looking at this. There's characterisation studies that's comprehensive across the borough. Clearly areas like conservation areas, we have all that mapped, and clearly super density and tall buildings are generally less appropriate in those areas. So we do have a whole layer of lots of different layers of maps setting out those constraints and opportunities. So yes, generally that is what the local plan should be doing.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, because obviously 1,592 homes a year is a lot more than we have delivered previously, or than the council's delivered previously, but also the local residents and community don't necessarily come on board and support the proposals for new development in their areas. So what plans are there to try and bring people with the council in order to deliver these homes. I can see that there's a communication and consultation plan, but it seems mainly, apart from the drop-ins, to be very much about broadcast rather than engagement. And also I'm wondering how much use it is putting things in local libraries, and would we be better looking at things like shopping centre events and being in places where more people go and there's more footfall to engage, rather than the very engaged people who will happily run into your library and look at these documents.
Yep, all good points. So certainly we don't intend it to be broadcast and a version of consultation at all. And the first steps consultation that we're looking to do is very much, we will not have drafted the plan at that point, and it's asking open questions on what people want and what choices they would like to make within that. So that is definitely not a broadcast. That is asking people questions for them to feed in at an early stage. So we definitely don't intend it to be like that. But yes, thank you for the suggestion about things like shopping centres. The list in here is our first initial draft of types of things we'll do, and we can certainly add things like that in when we firm up the comms and engagement plan. So yes, that's a useful suggestion.
Okay, doesn't look like we have any further questions, so thank you very much. We are going to move to the next item, which is item number 7. That's Cabinet Member Questions. And we have been joined by Councillor Kirsten Hearn, whose portfolio includes environment, climate change, sustainability. But for today's meeting, we're interested in aspects relating to the London Plan, planning enforcement, planning policy and delivery, and Section 106 stroke community infrastructure levy policy. So I will invite Councillor Kirsten Hearn to say a few words to just bring us up to speed on some of those aspects, and then it will be opened up to the panel members to ask you a few questions.
Having a little bit of a hard time here. Oh, turn it on.
It's on. It's on.
That's great. Thanks very much. Thanks. Okay. Well, obviously, the review of the local plan is going to take quite a lot of the planning team, quite a bit of time. There'll be lots of opportunity to feed into it as it develops, and Rob's been telling you a bit about that, and you've got paper on it. NCIL, which is Community Infrastructure Levy, which is the money we get to fund schemes through various developments. We want to democratise it more, make it a bit more socialist. It's ever so unfair. Some places get lots of money, and some, like two wards, for example, share about 12k between them. And there's a relationship to be had with those who have development in and those who don't, actually. So what we've made as a proposal is a series of top slicings, really, to even it up a bit more, and also to give a level of priority to parts of the borough that really have not received much, particularly in the east. I'm happy to answer more questions about that. It's just gone out to consultation now. No decisions have been made yet about precisely what it will be spent on in itself. Okay. Article 4 directions. And when I took over this portfolio, I began to encounter a bewildering number of odd things. Article 4 directions sounds weird, but actually you may recall that we've had a few planning developments that try to turn office space into residential space, and actually they want to try and build rabbit hutches, and they're basically substandard to the homes that we want people to live in. We would like this to not happen anymore, because we believe that whilst residential space is important, business and office space is also equally important for the borough, because if you've got businesses here, you've got jobs, and that's also important. So we want an Article 4 a direction enables you to say, right, well, we're not going to allow the conversion of office space into residential space in these areas. And so we've chosen just a couple of them at the moment because we can't do a blanket thing because we'll be got by the Secretary of State, who won't like that at all. We have to keep kind of under the radar a bit on this and not hope they don't notice at one or two areas. Anyway, so it's kind of like Wood Green and Tottenham Town Centre areas, the ones we're looking at first. It's going to take quite a long time to do it. It's got about a year-long sort of space in which about a year space in which we implement this. If we go any faster than that, then it will upset the Secretary of State as well. So there's lots of complications around that. The Highgate School supplementary planning document is quite interesting. Highgate School is the private school. They've got quite a lot of land and buildings, and they're going to do a load of things, which will affect Highgate Village and Highgate area as well. Some of it will be also some amenities that perhaps the community could use, like space they can hire, and they'll be doing quite a bit of work around climate change in relation to their plans. So we're just doing a bit of that. That's just going to the next cabinet. Community infrastructure levy rate rise in the east of the borough. It used to be as small as £15, and in the west 200 and something or other for, sorry, I'm being a bit vague, for some areas. And we felt that it needed evening up a bit. We couldn't even it up as much as we want to, but we're suggesting a rate of £50. So this will accrue a bit more money, which we can then use in the community infrastructure levy. So the consultations need done on that. Right. That's, I think, all I'm going to start with at the moment. Apologies, I'm coming down with a very nasty cold. Fingers and toes are crossed. I'm over here and I'll stay over here, okay? Anyway, so I'm a bit wobbly.
Thank you. That's a very useful introduction. We'll now take questions from panel members. We go to Councillor Hare first.
Ruth will ask one of the questions I had. Just interested in a little bit more information on your comments on the Highgate neighbourhood SIL and Highgate School, if that was... I didn't quite catch what you were saying.
Sorry, it's the Highgate School, SPC? D, sorry, SPD. Help me out with those planning...
Supplementary planning document.
Thank you, supplementary planning document. And it was like, this is another big wordy thing about this bit of the portfolio. Basically, it's coming to Cabinet and has great descriptions on it. So I'll ask my the officer here to actually go into a bit more detail for you.
Yep, so the Highgate School supplementary planning document is going to Cabinet next week for approval to consult on a draft. So it's to get it out there, to get people's feedback and comments on it. It's obviously important to the local area. Residents want to know what the school's doing. So it's about a master plan for the school area so that residents can see the big picture rather than lots of planning applications coming forward separately. It's about looking at it as a whole. So to start consultation shortly after the Cabinet approval.
Councillor Gordon.
I've got about 3 or 4 questions. Shall I just give them all at once, or do you want them one at a time? Sorry? One at a time, okay. First of all, then, I didn't quite catch what you said about the SIL rates going forward, because obviously in the east of the borough have been suffering under ridiculously low SIL rates, even though those residents in the east of the borough have been suffering ridiculously high levels of disruption to their lives, and it does seem very unfair. So I'd be pleased about any sort of redistribution, but the general rate overall, how has that been changed, and has it been finally agreed now?
So consultation finished early in February, and we're currently considering the representations. We didn't actually have very many. Resulting from some of those representations, we need to do some more viability work with our viability person at BNP Paribas, and then we'll be taking it forward basically to examination. So there's basically a formal process where we actually have to appoint an inspector to basically examine the schedule, and we'll be going forward with that. And what we're hoping to do is to be implementing the new rate probably 1st of April next year. And the rate, well, so we are still going for the £50 for the residential per square metre. The extra evidence, I think, mostly relates to the warehouse living rate that we're seeking to implement. But we don't think that anything we've got in on anything else should cause us to take anything different forward.
Yeah, go on.
So we're talking about £50 per square metre across the board now, or and that's obviously in addition to the mayoral sill, is it?
So it's £50 per square metre in all of the east of the borough, replacing the 15 that there was. Yes, exactly. The rates in the rest of the borough remain unchanged.
You had further questions to ask, Councillor Gordon.
Thanks. Our next question is about affordable housing. So I'm assuming that this has now moved into your portfolio as opposed to being in Councillor Ibrahim's portfolio as it was previously for the housing strategy. So it's about the level of affordable and how that would be split between social housing and other affordable products.
So I think the housing strategy still sits with Councillor Ibrahim. We'll be looking at changes to the affordable housing planning policy through the local plan review, although it is true to say that some of that will refer back to what's in the housing strategy that will come before the local plan review.
So, the next question.
Right, the next question is about climate change, as your Cabinet Member for Climate Change.
Hang on, that's not within the remit of this panel.
No, but it's... Can I just finish my question?
It may not be necessarily within the remit.
I am absolutely aware we're not the environmental panel. So my question was in relation to planning, how you were seeing the remit that we have now on tackling climate change as a council and air quality and all the lot of discussion we've had in full council about that, and how you're relating that to planning and how it will be part of the local plan.
Obviously, it's reflected in the local plan as it emerges. In relation, we already have pretty good sort of planning regulations around sustainability and climate change. They're pretty good, actually, although the government's trying to challenge them a bit. So that's already there, and there's a lot of regulations in relation to buildings which meet the climate change concerns, and I think that what we've got actually is pretty okay. Some of the things we can't change because they're national legislation, but for detail I'll ask officers to explain some of those, perhaps.
Yeah, I can just... So that's all exactly correct. So in particular, actually, the government has recently done a consultation on something called the Future Homes Standard, where effectively they're trying to set a standard across the whole country, which actually, compared to what London delivers at the moment, is a lower standard than what we get in London already and what we've got already in the Haringey local plan. So this council submitted an objection to that because we still want the freedom to have higher environmental and carbon standards. So Councillor Hearn's exactly right on that. And more generally in the local plan, so it's not just about the buildings and the standards of the buildings, but it's encouraging people to walk and cycle and use sustainable modes of travel and making sure high density development has good public transport accessibility rather than putting it somewhere that doesn't have good public transport accessibility. So it's all of those things are built in and embedded into the local plan process.
Councillor Hare?
Could I ask any of those who've been answering about the new Commission report from the government called Creating Space for Beauty, and it's an interim report, I think. And how are we going to respond? And is it helpful to you?
We can pick that up. So generally, if good design of new buildings, so the Commission report was all about better design of buildings and making them more beautiful. So generally, that being raised on a platform is a good thing. We should always seek high standards of design for new buildings. Whether the detail of the report achieves that is a matter for discussion. But it is good that design is being put up there. The government has made statements saying that it should be harder for councils to lose at appeal where we are pushing for high standards of design. So in that sense, it's good that it's pushing design up the agenda, but I suppose it's about how the government now takes this through perhaps new legislation and actually continues that message, because there is also a message to deliver lots and lots more housing and grant planning permission for as many things as possible. So we need to see how that government message balances out. The government's also published a national design guide to sit alongside the national planning policy framework related to that report, and they're also looking at national design code and local design codes as well. So we'll need to see how that comes out. So we're very much keeping our eye on all of that stuff.
Emma, you wanted to come?
No, I mean, can I also add, I think we've already got very good and robust design policies, so we're pretty ahead of maybe a lot of other places that are outside London. I think my own reflections on that particular report is that a lot of it, I think, is not maybe quite so applicable in London, although some of it is. But I'm also interested, there's been the Mayor's issued a new design guidance, I've forgotten what it's actually called, this morning, and I think that is actually something interesting for us to look at, and that may be more applicable. But as Rob said, I think what's really concerning to me is we've got kind of this push for government on the targets, and if we don't meet them, for there being presumption in favour of development, but at the same time they're actually asking us to get kind of applications for better design buildings, and it's not possible to do both things. And so it'd be interesting to see how that kind of plays out.
Okay, you've got Councillor Gordon.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether this is a question for Kirsten or for Emma, but well, I've got two questions. One is about play space, and are we, and forgive me if you've already told me this, but are we now using our own bespoke child yield calculator? And because I know we did have some discussions on this panel about that. And then I've got another question for Kirsten. Shall I say that now? So this is more of a political question, really. And given that this panel has taken an opinion on how the directorates are organised between housing, regeneration and planning, and has called for separation of those directorates so that planning is directly reporting to the Chief Executive, it was our intention. And given that there is some, we think, can be some conflict of interest between what's required by regeneration and what's required by planning, whether you'd got any opinion on that yourself.
So with the play space, so in the end, what we've implemented the new GLA standard, and we were having a debate, weren't we, about whether or not we would do something ourselves, and we're going to basically park that and have that conversation through the local plan review. So it's quite a lot of work if we were actually going to commission some bespoke work to actually work out what our own standard would be, and we just need to think about whether we want to spend time doing that or whether we're basically satisfied with what that additional new mayor's standard was. So that's where that got to. We said we'd look at it through local plan review, which we still will.
In relation to housing planning and regeneration separation, I would agree with that actually. I think that housing itself needs a specific focus, and certainly regeneration it's a very big set of portfolios to try and manage, and I think it will be better served if it's separated. In relation to the planning one, I don't quite understand where that should be in relation to what you're saying, and I haven't actually had a chance to read your report, so I'll go and read it.
So I've got a couple of questions. So you referred to the consultation that is currently that's underway rather, redistribution of neighbourhood community infrastructure levy. I support the socialist principles behind it to redistribute the neighbourhood SIL. Now, I've had representations from constituents in my ward since Noel Park and Haringey have attracted the most amount. So I think it would be good if you could actually set out the rationale for why we're doing this. That's the first question. And secondly, let's say that it does go ahead, we change the policy. My understanding is that we've not actually spent money that's accumulated for quite a number of years. And so what is the plan to spend, and do residents get a say on how it is spent within their area?
Right. So the consultation is going on at the moment for this in the first place. The second part, the rationale behind it, I think, well, the rationale behind it, sorry, yeah, is that some areas of the borough receive a very small amount, and who have, and it seems very unfair to us. And I'm thinking about West Green, for example, areas that are certainly in need, and just because they don't actually have any development in their area to accrue kind of like specific money from, because the original idea was to spend where it's earned, and we kind of feel that not every area has the development opportunity blight, however you wish, because sometimes it's really difficult living in a very developing area. We wanted to even that out a bit more, particularly to give some level of priority to areas that are poorer and more disadvantaged. So that's the rationale behind it. In relation to its final distribution, that is still, as I say, is out to consultation. So that's all I can say about it at the moment.
Could you address my question about how it's going to be spent? And I understand that it's not been spent for a number of years, and whether residents have any input, any say in terms of how the money is going to be spent in their area.
I can pick that up if that helps. There was a consultation in 2018 with residents on how to spend it, so we got lots and lots of responses on that, so we're keen that we act on that consultation and start to spend the money, but we just want this consultation about redistribution, which is live now, to finish first before we then do that spend. But we are aware people have been waiting some time for that. It is also fair to say, though, that it has taken some years for the amounts of money to build up something useful. So actually, if we were looking at this a few years ago, there wouldn't have been much money to talk about. And it's only more recently it's started to build up. And we are looking to do another consultation, what we'll call a round 2 neighbourhood SIL consultation, later this year, for another opportunity for people to feed in, and we'd like to make that very engaging as well.
Go on.
Yeah, I just want to add something about kind of the nature of the consultation. To lots of people who don't know, they might think entering a consultation on community infrastructure levy might not mean much to their lives and what they do. And so we tend to get responses from people in specific kind of like areas of interest. And we're quite concerned to make sure that we hear from people from all sections of the community and all different groups and all different parts of the borough who are able to say what they feel about different projects that they might feel we should be doing. And I don't really feel that it has been that representative. You know, people who are used to kind of like, you know, dealing with kind of these kinds of things will be comfortable in responding, and I think that in the future what we're going to try and do is to find ways to engage and involve different communities and different community groups across the borough so we can hear from them too, and that will involve obviously a bit of explaining the dark arts of the community infrastructure levy and all that it means as well, but that's part of the democratisation that we're very keen to have to stamp this way of distributing infrastructure levy with our political colours.
Councillor Barnes.
I just wanted to ask some questions around the community thingammy levy, infrastructure levy. So is £50 per square metre in the East ambitious enough, given that, for example, there was an awful lot of student accommodation that went up, and students generally pay more per week than people pay on their rentals monthly in private rented accommodation that hasn't been newly built and therefore hasn't been subject to the SIL money? And why we haven't delivered anything with that SIL money as yet. So I was looking today at a list of projects delivered by Brent Council who have been busily spending their money, and we haven't spent any of it. And I believe that in round one there were 500 or so responses, and most of those were around Muswell Hill Library. So I am concerned that there will be residents in the Muswell Hill Friends of Muswell Hill Library are very, very organised and obviously got lots of people to come forward and ask for money for projects there, which should definitely go ahead. However, how will we actually convince other people to apply for money and not end up having 500 applications for, I don't know, Highgate Woods or something to be invested in and new meadows in Crouch End or whatever it happens to be?
I will suggest the officers they give you a thumbnail sketch of viability payments and how things are calculated, because it's actually very complicated, but getting £50 in the east of the borough is going to be quite a challenge. They'll do that. In relation to why haven't we spent the money, because there wasn't enough of it actually until more recently, and I think that we'd gone through one consultation and we needed to revisit it.
Just to elaborate on some of the points Councillor Hearn makes, comparing to Brent has a lot more development. I think Brent is the top or second top in the whole of London in terms of the amount of development and the amount of SIL that comes forward. So there is a difference there. Yeah, lots of tall buildings in Wembley. However, you know, we do accept that it has taken some time to get to this stage with neighbourhood SIL. So we do want to get the money spent and through the right process. And it's worth just saying your point about student accommodation. So whenever we talk about the new rates, we only ever talk about the headline rate, which is the main one, which is the residential rate, which is £50 per square metre that we're proposing in the east. But we do have other rates for other uses. So student accommodation, we're looking to increase from the current 15 to 85. So we are looking at getting a bit more for student accommodation directly related to the point that you raise. And Councillor Hearn's just asked me to explain a bit more about the viability. So the rates, setting the rates is set purely based on the financial viability of development, and that is a requirement by law. We have to set it in that way. So we can't set the rates based on what the need for infrastructure might be in that particular area, which is the spending side of the argument, and that's all the discussions about neighbourhood SIL. The setting the rates can only be based on viability, and we're tested at an independent examination with the evidence on that. And the responses we got to the rates consultation, which only recently closed, we have had objections from developers saying the £50 is too high. And we obviously want to push that through and make sure that we're getting the maximum out of that. So we will be tested in a public examination later this year, to make sure we're setting the rates at the highest level we would like to set.
And in coming up with the £50, we actually spent quite a long time challenging BNP about whether we could go higher than 50, and actually, 50 really is the maximum that we can do. And when we started this process, we were actually only going to raise the rate in Tottenham Hale, but what we've done is actually we've really pushed the boundaries, and we're doing it in North Tottenham as well. So I think we have really challenged BNP, and put to them all of the things that you guys have said to us over the years, and this is where we are. But we've got to stand. We have to have something that we can stand behind at the examination. Otherwise, we lose the whole thing and delay it anyway. So that's kind of where we are.
Yeah.
When would the SIL rates be reviewed again then? Because obviously things in property development, residential, business, etc. change quite quickly.
We can look at it every, say, 5 years, but it's also important to note the rates automatically increase over time to inflation, so they're pegged to building cost inflation, so they do increase automatically. We also have to factor in there's a risk to the market going downwards as well as upwards, so we do have to factor that in, and that's something that the examiner tests us on as well. So it is a balance, and it can go down as well as up.
Thank you, Kirsten. I don't believe we have any further questions, so we will now move to the next item on the agenda, which is an update on where things are with Broadwater Farm, and we have David Sherrington, Director of Broadwater Farm from Homes for Haringey. So if you could do an introduction, and there will be questions from panel members after that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for inviting me tonight. So I think most of you will be familiar with the estate, but I'll just give you a quick rundown of the estate, the background that led to the establishment of the Broadwater Farm programme, and a quick summary of the key projects that we're working on. So Broadwater Farm is located east of Lordship Rec in N17. It's made up of 1,063 homes across 12 blocks and 27 low-rise houses. There's 2 19-storey towers, 9 medium-rise blocks, which are made up of a 6-storey main block and 2 4-storey wings, and a ziggurat building, which is at the southern boundary of the estate, called Tangmere, which is, when it was originally designed, was the jewel in the crown of the estate in the architect's eyes. So the majority of the homes on the estate are 1 or 2 bed, and they make up 86% of the homes. The vast majority of family-sized accommodation was in Tangmere, which is one of the buildings that is scheduled for demolition. So a bit of background, and I'm sure you're familiar with this work started following the tragic events at Grenfell, where there were concerns around large panel system buildings more broadly across London, which really started with a concern that emerged with an estate down in Southwark. So we were written to by the DCLG. We followed that letter and commissioned structural surveys across Broadwater Farm, and in summary, 11 of the 12 blocks on the estate were identified to have one or more problems with the large panel system form of construction. I've included within the report a document that links to all of the structural surveys, all of the cabinet reports that have been taken since, so for those of you who wanted to do further reading, then hopefully that was easy to access. So that's a bit of background about how we got to establishing the programme. So all of these survey results really started to emerge at the back end of 2017 and into 2018. Due to the scale of intervention that was required in terms of immediate reaction to mitigate the risks that we identified, and then to start planning about some of the projects that we need to bring forward in terms of new homes. The Council and Homes for Haringey agreed to form a shared project team to ensure that all the different work streams were coherent and communicated as one to residents and stakeholders, and that is led by myself. I think one of the benefits of that approach is that when we're in meetings, we can talk to residents about the leaking tap right through to the designs for new homes. So trying to have a service in response to the programme of work down there that is root to branch, and it covers all aspects of the service that the Council and Homes for Haringey provide. So the establishment of that joint project team then led to the setting up of the work streams. So just very briefly, I'll touch on those and I'll hand over for questions. So the first one is around estate and housing management. It was quite manifestly the case that the quality of the housing management service down there was not as good as it could be. So we've been working to improve that core standard because, to be frank, we have to build the trust of residents to do the core service if we're ever going to get them to work with us on anything more ambitious like bringing forward new council homes. So it was really important to us to try and improve the quality of that housing management service, and we work really closely with the Residents Association, and Jacob and I meet every couple of weeks with his colleagues from the Residents Association to talk about the various improvements that they want to see, and for them to really hold me to account for the things that we've been talking about. So the second item is around the rehousing. So you'll be aware that two of the blocks on the estate, Tangmere and Northolt, we are going to demolish following a Section 105 consultation that was held with residents. So I have a rehousing team that is based on the estate that works one-to-one with residents to rehouse them from Tangmere and Northolt. By and large, the vast majority of that rehousing work is complete, save for the leasehold interests that are within both blocks, and we're working with those leaseholders to negotiate with them the sale of their properties so we can secure vacant possession on both blocks. In Tangmere, all secure tenants have moved out, and in Northolt there's only 8 secure tenants now who have not yet identified a move, but we're working with them and the lettings team to identify properties as they become available. The third item is the district heating and kitchens and bathrooms programme. So we are doing a district heating programme because one of the fundamental problems on the estate was it wasn't suitable to have individual gas boilers in any of the flats. We were given a very short deadline by the statutory gas body, Cadent, to remove gas from every block in about 7 months, which was a particularly difficult challenge. So they came to see us in around about February 2018 and said we're coming to cut the gas off in November. So one of the key pieces of work we were doing was getting that district heating system installed. We've coupled that district heating programme up with a kitchen and bathroom programme. Due to the level of disruption we're causing people when we go into their flats to install new heating systems and new cold boosted water systems, that has meant we've been taking out kitchen units, bathroom units, and actually some of those bathrooms and kitchens didn't meet the Decent Home Standard. So we've extended the contract to include kitchens and bathrooms where necessary, and that's led to about 270 homes benefiting from new kitchens and or new bathrooms as part of the work. The fourth work stream is around structural and refurbishment works. So the blocks that we are retaining, in particular the medium-rise block, require structural works to the flank walls of the 4-storey wings. At the same time, what we want to do is combine that structural work with a refurbishment programme. You only have to go down to the estate to observe that it is in need of external modernisation and internal modernisation. So there is a comprehensive scope of works for a refurbishment programme that is currently in design with our consultants that we will be talking to residents about later in the summer so we can start rolling that programme out as soon as possible. The reason why we wanted to combine those works was the structural work in itself will puncture through the waterproof membrane of the block, so we're going to be taking off the cladding, taking off the roof coverings, so it made sense to, while we've got scaffold up and given the evident need for refurbishment, to do those works at the same time. The fifth work stream is around new homes and the urban design framework. So new homes does what it says on the tin, which is to re-provide new council homes on both the Tangmere and Northolt sites. The council's commitment is to build at least as many as it is demolishing. The capacity studies we've done indicate that we think we can bring more than is existing on the site, and we have just appointed architects that were appointed by Cabinet in December to start developing those new designs in engagement with residents. They haven't started that work yet. They were only appointed actually in January. The Cabinet decision was December, so we're just working with them now about the engagement and consultation plan that we'll be talking to the Residents Association about soon. The urban design framework is a kind of way in which I think public servants sometimes write something that is meant to describe something that we can't describe in a more simple way, but briefly it says what we want to do is when we bring forward new homes, instead of just saying, here's a site, we want to put some new homes on it, is trying to bring forward those new homes while looking at the broader context of the estate. So there are some things on the estate that we want to improve, not just around new homes, but around the public realm and around how those new homes can influence the public realm and how they can influence the way in which it feels to walk around that estate. If you've been to the estate, it was all once streets in the sky. Those streets in the sky were all taken down through an estate action programme in the 90s and the early noughties. So the actual ground floor experience is predominantly car park orientated and can feel fairly hostile. There's no front doors leading out onto the ground floor. So looking at how we can bring forward not just new homes but potential other new community amenity space, commercial space within a broader design framework that will make the whole estate work better. So it's about just not being too narrow in our view. The next work stream is around communication and engagement, so we're working really hard to improve that area. I think the key pieces of work that we've been doing is a lot of engagement with the Residents Association, a lot of work by sitting at the bottoms of blocks and talking to people as they come home or leave for the day. We've had public meetings that the Residents Association have called. We do a newsletter, a website, we do estate walkabouts. So there's a lot of new engagement tools that we're doing just to try and build that relationship with residents, because I think there was a lack of trust because there's been a lot of consultations on Broadwater Farm in the past that frankly haven't led to a great deal of activity. So I think it's important that by being down there quite a lot, it's been around rebuilding that faith and trust that if you come and see us and ask us to do something, then we actually will go and do it. The next one is around socio-economic programmes. So we have a programme funded by the Estate Renewal Fund and by Haringey Gold looking at socio-economic programmes. They are based on the data that we get from the kind of census and all the other kind of areas that we might draw data from, housing benefit information, so on and so forth. And the key areas of focus for that are around positive activities for young people, employment and skills, and there is an item around mental health, and there is a sport programme. So we have a range of programmes that are based on the data and the intelligence that we've had either through consultations or through the data that the public sector holds around the socio-economic outputs on the estate. The next one is around non-housing assets. So there are some other amenities on the estate that aren't housing. So there is a community centre in the corner of the estate which is on a long lease to Fusion, and there is a number of commercial units on the estate that are workspaces that are let out on a head lease, and there's an NHS medical centre on the site as well. So what we want to do is make sure that we are talking to all of those partners when we are bringing forward change and making sure they're part of that conversation. And finally is around demolition. It's kind of don't need to explain in great detail what that one's about. So that is really about procuring the contractor for the demolition. It sounds easy. It's not an easy project because of the nature of the buildings. They are at risk of collapse in the event of an explosion. We're not going to, obviously, therefore, there'll be no detonation and a collapse of the building. They have to be taken apart piece by piece. They kind of get deconstructed. And at Northolt, at least, we've got a district energy centre at the foot of the block, and we've got another block that connects into it. So the actual demolition work itself is a real engineering challenge, and so we're working to design that procurement so that once we're closer to vacant possession, we can go out and procure a contractor to bring forward that demolition. So I'll leave it there, Chair. That's just a very brief summary. I've tried to include with the report information about where we're up to on each scheme and some appendices, so hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. We're going to take some questions, starting with Councillor Barnes.
Thank you. And I don't know if you'll be the right person to answer this question or not, but in your report it says that During engagement with residents, etc., during 2018, it became clear that cleaning, grounds maintenance and communal repair standards on the estate were not satisfactory. So my questions are, why was this only recognised in 2018? And how does this look across other estates, which is why you're probably not the man to answer this question, other estates that the council runs, so Northumberland Park would be one example, and are they having the same issues, and is that something that needs to be addressed across the piece?
Sorry, I never turned my microphone off. I will remember to do that next time. So, in respect to your first part, I think there was a lot more focus on the estate, a lot more of us walking around and looking at it at a more senior level, and so that was my observation, and that was something that I raised and said this is something that I think we need to improve. In respect of our wider estate, we have just introduced a new estate grading system that seeks to improve the way we are monitoring council estates for cleanliness and communal repairs, because the old system, I think, was probably too generous in terms of the way in which it scored the quality of the service, and a new system has been introduced which has seen a reduction in the performance, because we are now trying to be more frank about what the quality is, and that more frank analysis, I think, is allowing us to identify where the problems are and where we need to focus. The Homes for Haringey board also recently approved a new deep cleaning team, a team for a period of 12 to 18 months, which is employed to go and around the council's housing portfolio and do a series of intensive deep cleans into lots of estates where those deep cleans haven't been done for some time. So the Homes for Haringey has recognised that the standard hasn't been where it's needed to be for a period of time, so it's investing additional resources into improving that standard and bringing that standard up through deep cleaning, so that standard can then be maintained.
Councillor Hare.
I'd quite like to follow up on that, because all estates get visits. They get visits from councillors. These are all written up. And well, it's a comment really rather than a question, which I am surprised that there was the feedback mechanism that did exist didn't cause the problems to be recognised, really. I mean, you might like to comment on that. The other question I've got, just regarding Broadwater Lodge and the future for that.
In respect of the wider estate service provision, that isn't really my area of responsibility or expertise, so I can take that question away, Chair, and bring back a fuller response on the estate service standards. And so I can certainly do that. In respect of Broadwater Lodge, so Broadwater Lodge is identified as one of the opportunity sites. So when we procured the architects, we asked them to develop detailed designs for replacement homes on the Tangmere and Northolt sites. We've also asked them to develop design briefs for 3 opportunity sites, which are the Old Moselle School, which is to the north of the site, a strip of land that runs from the north east corner up to Lordship Rec, and then the Broadwater Lodge site, which is a former care home, which is currently a temporary accommodation hostel. I don't think that including it within that brief means that we have a desire to close it. I think that any plan to bring forward a closure of that unit would need to have a corresponding action that looked at how we would re-provide that service, because clearly at the moment Broadwater Lodge provides a essential service to allow us to house people temporarily while we assess their housing application, and it saves the council quite a considerable amount of money in terms of nightly let accommodation and hostel accommodation. So it's not to say, I think, including it within the brief means that it's going to be closed. I think we recognise that it would need to come with a plan to re-provide that elsewhere. So, do you want to add anything to that, Dan?
Could you switch on your mic? And it's important because otherwise it doesn't get picked up on the webcam.
Okay, I'd be really grateful if you could just clarify that strip of land you mentioned.
So if you are in, let me pull up my Google Maps, but if you're in the very far northeast of the site, then let me just pull up there is a path that runs up the estate, runs out of the estate up onto Lordship Lane. So yeah, so on one side there's a strip of land and it runs up to Brookside. On the other side you've got Moira Close, which is Havanteg Housing Association development and the old school. So it runs parallel to Mount Pleasant Road. So I can send you yeah.
Is there not a sewer underneath there?
Possibly. That would all be subject to further site surveys, and you know, we've also got a river running under there as well, which we need to properly identify. So,
Councillor Say.
Yes, do you have a time frame for completing the whole thing? Because there's people living there and it's going to be a building site and demolition site and whatever. And then they're going to be building new stuff. So what's the time frame?
I think it's a little early to say what the time frame is for it entirely at the moment. We've got the clear timetable for the architects to bring forward designs through to a ballot, which is into next spring, early summer. The timetable for the development of new homes after that will very much depend on firstly how that process goes, and then the procurement of a contractor, and then how long and then the scale of the build programme. In terms of the refurbishment programme, we are currently designing the pilot blocks. One of the challenges around the refurbishment programme is that in order to do the structural works on the flank walls, we are very, very likely to have to decant people temporarily for anywhere between 2 and 10 weeks. We need to do some contractor engagement to understand the sequencing, but that logistical challenge by its very nature means that it's not a standard refurbishment programme where we turn up and stick up a scaffold, do the work and then move on. It's going to require a lot of engagement with residents. So I think we're still in a design. This year is very much about flushing through that design and working through what it is that we're going to do, following which we will be able to put a timetable for how long that is likely to take. So, yeah.
Just to add to that, I mean, to kind of recognise the point you're making, there's clearly a balance to strike here between not prolonging the disruption a moment longer than we have to, while at the same time making sure that we do justice, as David says, to the quite kind of possibly wide range of options we've got, and the need to make sure that the residents are really genuinely involved in the process of designing this. And kind of the more you do that, the more time you need to spend on it usually. One of the opportunities we've now got in the work that we're about to start engaging with the community there is to understand how they see that balance, about how they want to balance the issues of kind of time against the kind of the way that they might want to be involved, the way that we might proceed with the project. So we're very deliberately not committing to a definitive answer to your question until we've started those conversations with residents, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, Councillor.
You mentioned a ballot. Why is there a ballot?
So in the GLA guidance for estate regeneration, there is a requirement to hold ballots. We sought an exemption from the GLA ballot requirement under health and safety grounds, which they granted, and in the process of granting that, we, correct me if I'm wrong, Alan, agreed with them that we would still seek to run a ballot process so we could gain consent and buy-in really from the community and from residents about the plans that we want to bring forward. So,
just to clarify, so the exemption, which the GLA did grant us, was an exemption from what would normally be their requirement, which was that we do the ballot before we made a decision to demolish. They accepted that because of their very specific health and safety issues, that wasn't practical or appropriate or necessary. But they were only prepared to grant that on the basis that we then committed to a ballot on the new plans, if you see what I mean, for what would replace the homes. And that crucially, is a ballot not just of the people who were in Tangmere and Northolt, but a ballot of the whole estate. So we have to come up with a programme which can kind of win the support and confidence of everyone who was and still is living there.
What I wonder is, are you planning to knock other blocks down?
that doesn't feature in the plans at the moment, but I mean, we'll talk to residents about what they want. But the current, what we know we have to do is knock down Northolt and Tangmere. We know that there are these other opportunities for the 3 sites that David mentioned. Nothing else is in our plans at the moment. Nothing else. There's no other proposals on the table now. But we're going into the discussion with residents with an open mind.
Take one final question, Councillor Barr.
Thank you. Are you setting targets for the numbers of people you want to vote in the ballot and you expect to engage or want to try to get to engage in the consultation work, as opposed to just going, oh, well, it was 18%, that's okay, which has been a turnout in a local by-election in one of the wards in Knoll Park, for example?
That isn't something we've thought about. The level of engagement that we had through the Section 105 consultation, which is what we did prior to taking a decision to demolish the block, was pretty good. I think it was in the 70–80%. So, but that's certainly something that we can think about. I think we would want a high level of engagement. I think that is really important to us. So we can take that away and certainly discuss that and come back to you about if there's any best practice out there about what others have done in terms of setting targets for the level of engagement that we should be seeking.
Thank you, David. So that was very useful. We are now going to move to item 10, which is really an overview of housing associations in the borough. So this will be looking at the relationship between the council and the housing associations, and also some information about which housing associations we have in the borough and the percentage of stock for each one. So we've got Alan Benson, who's going to introduce the report. I also understand that Councillor John Bevan and Nikki Small, who would like to speak to this agenda item. If you could kindly come forward and take seats. And then after Alan has spoken, we'll go to you to give your input, to ask your questions, and then the panel members will also be able to ask their questions. So let's go over to Alan first of all to introduce the report.
Thank you. The report itself is a fairly short and fairly simple background information about housing associations and their role in the borough and our relationship with them. And I should say we discussed this with the chair of the panel. He asked us to set up an all-members briefing on housing associations where we can talk through this and talk through the particular issue about how you engage with housing associations as elected members and the levers you can pull to get them to do the things you might wish them to do locally. We haven't sent that out yet. We've got a date for it. I didn't know if you wanted it to go in your name or in our name. So I thought, actually, like what you think, how you want that to go. You might decide differently at the end of this item, we'll see. But we can send that invite out tomorrow if you're okay to go ahead with that. That's on the 7th of April, and there's no other council meetings in the book that evening. Anyway, as a very quick background to housing associations, they own now about half the social rented stock in England as a whole of the country, slightly less than half in this borough. So Homes of Haringey own about 15,000 rented homes. Housing associations collectively own about 13,000 rented homes. But interestingly, in this borough, I think it's just 7 housing associations own almost 85% of all those housing association properties. So the vast majority of our work is dealing with just those 7 housing associations. But there are about 25 other ones that own very small numbers of stock in the borough. And the table of who owns what is set out on page 60. And we have a list we keep in our directorate of all the housing association properties. If you ever have a property and want to find out which housing association manages it, we can let you know. And we keep up to date a contacts list for every housing association, including their chief executive, their director of development, their local management people, and any direct care line they have. So we can give you this, directly contact them and engage with them if you wish to do so. Broadly speaking, housing associations have most of the shared sort of interest that local authorities have as a social landlord. They have the same concerns over housing management, over decent homes, etc. There's probably 2 key differences that actually create separation between us and housing associations. One absolute key thing is they are not, like us, a local housing authority. They have no homelessness duties, no homelessness responsibilities. For us, that's an absolute key of what we do. For them, it isn't the driver. And it's been noticeable over the last 10 years, the extent to which housing associations have moved away from that kind of homelessness responsibility and working closely with authorities on that. But secondly, what they do have is, over the last 20 years, what they developed, they've become the main developer of new housing, new affordable housing. As local authorities had to move out, now fortunately moving back into it, as we moved out, they became the big developer. And the vast 95% or more of the social housing built over the last 30 years has been built by housing associations. That means their focus has really been strongly on development, building and numbers in a way that ours never was as a council house builder. And they've got into an awful lot of building of mid-market offers of shared ownership and shared equity, which councils never did. And they've got into a very large way into building private sale to cross-subsidise. And you could say, although they would say they were forced into that by government needing a cross-subsidy model, but most people observing it might think they went into that rather too willingly into that model, and they've now become very big volume developers of private housing, not all of which is needed to cross-subsidise. But that does mean there are much wealthier organisations as housing organisations than most local authorities. Their stock tends to be 100% a decent home standard. Local authorities tend not to, particularly big players. And they have much nicer offices and they pay much higher salaries than most local authorities do. But they haven't been building in a big way over the last 10, 15 years the social rented housing that most of us feel we would want to see. What's also happened at the same time, and it's been quite remarkable in the last 15 years, is the extent to which the government has consciously and deliberately turned off controls both of local authorities and even government itself over housing associations. And that's reached a pitch over the last few years because the Housing Association debt was reclassified by the National Audit Office as public debt. That put £60 billion of debt onto the public debt at the time the government was absolutely driven to be reducing national debt under the Cameron-Osborne administration. So they were desperate to get housing associations back off the public books, and they did that by turning off a lot of controls that national and local government had over them. When I started in housing, housing association could only get grants from government if the local authority agreed it could have that grant. A housing association had to take all nominations from local authorities. It couldn't negotiate on that. You know, a housing association could not sell a property in the borough without the local authority agreeing. All those things have been washed away now, and we have to negotiate on any of those issues. And they've been washed away deliberately and consciously by the government to free up housing associations from our controls. So we don't have those big fundamental controls we did have. And what's made that a sharper issue in focus and created a division between associations and local authorities were some of the things that happened over recent years, things like the Housing and Planning Act the government introduced, which introduced a voluntary right to buy for housing association tenants, which they didn't object to, paid for by the high-value sales of council properties. And that created a major schism between local authorities and housing associations. Most authorities thought housing associations should not have done that deal with government at the cost of us selling our properties. They got involved in things like the affordable rent product, which meant they were converting existing social rent without us having any say over it into affordable rent products to get more supply. So the things they were doing were things that drove a split between us and housing associations. And they've noticed to me over the last 2 or 3 years, last 3 or 4 years, been trying to rebuild that relationship with local authorities. And we've had some very effective engagement with them in Haringey. There's been a couple of meetings with the leader and all the major housing association chief executives, and the G15 chief executive and deputy chief executive came in to see him very recently. We set up a regular quarterly briefing session with all our key housing association partners, where we go through key issues of shared interest. The last one was about fire safety. We brought the fire brigade in, or building control in, talked to housing associations. The one that we're having next month is going to be, later this month. No, it is next month. We're in March, aren't we? This month is going to be about safeguarding adults and children, etc., and how we can work together, associations on that. So we're having these regular briefings at operational level effective. And the Homes of Haringey themselves have regular meetings with all the housing management staff of the key housing associations to thrash out housing management issues. And those meetings happen regularly under the auspices of Homes of Haringey. So there's a range of ways which we engage with them. And we do have, as I said, a list of all the housing association key members of staff and contact details of them. We know all their properties, so if you have a problem with a housing association, we can help you engage with that housing association. What we can't ever do, of course, is just tell housing associations what to do, but they do tend and want to respond to our members' inquiries as soon as they can. And I would make one broad observation about housing associations compared to local authorities, and it's a generalisation, not about specifics, is housing associations would tell us they're better than managers and local authorities, and they would point to the fact they're much... I know everyone would shake their head, you're quite right to. They would say that because they would argue much more... Their homes, a decent home standard, almost 100%, local authorities are way short of it. We only have 80% of homes at decent home standard. No housing association has that problem. And they would also say that their customer satisfaction levels are much, much higher than ours. And that's true. There's no doubt that almost every housing association that operates in this borough has a much higher level of customer satisfaction. That's unarguable too. But what they are very, very bad at is dealing with specific problems of individuals or small communities, etc. With us, any of your tenants can move in and talk to you directly and have direct engagement with you, and they can walk to our offices and have a go at us. In a housing association, your chief executive may be sitting 150 miles away. They may have 30 or 40,000 homes scattered over 50 boroughs. They cannot possibly know what's going on. So as long as everything's going right, they're very, very good. When something goes wrong, they're not very good at reacting to it very quickly in the way that we are as a local authority. So more things go wrong with us, but we put them better quicker. With them, less things go wrong, but when they do go wrong, it can take a long time to put them right. And you have to push them quite hard.
Thank you, Alan. We'll go to Nikki Small, because you have experience of living in a property that's managed by 2 housing associations. So if you could share with us your experience and the question that you want to put to the panel. We'll see if Alan can address your question, but you need to understand, obviously, he's an employee of the council, and if your question or your inquiry relates to housing associations, they're not here. So anyway, over to you, and then we'll see how best to go forward.
Thank you and good evening. I'd like to thank you, Chair, for allowing me to come and talk this evening, and I would also ask permission from my neighbour who lives in the same road as myself to talk a bit as well. Anything that I might have forgotten to say. I am registered as severely disabled and I am in chronic pain at the moment, so that's why my neighbours come to give me a hand this evening. I'd like to talk a bit about my experience. I actually moved into Rolverden Place on the 26th of August 2002. To briefly describe where Rolverden Place is, it is at the back of Park Lane where Tottenham Hotspur's football club is. The surrounding streets to Rolverden Place is a war zone, and we have gangs, we have shootings, we've got stabbings, we've got Class A drug dealers, drug addicts, youths with balaclavas on trying to rob and take anything that they can. Rolverden Place is a private cul-de-sac with 24 houses. Southern Housing Group is responsible for the outside, i.e. car parks, the cleaning, you know, to deal with the gardening and the trees and everything else. And they also have some of the houses. Newlon Housing Trust have 4 houses in total, mine being one of them. Back in 2002, when I first moved in with 2 young children, I soon realised that there were rodents in my house. They were in the walls and the loft. I got pest control to come in, and within 6 months I had a cat to help control them, which he did. October the 17th, 2002, when coming out of a minicab with bags of shopping, as I set foot into the alleyway next to my house, a massive grey sewer rat ran over my feet. I like to add that I have a huge phobia of rodents. I realised then that Rolverden Place had an infestation of rats. The garden belonging to the freeholder or leaseholder next door to me at 18 was severely overgrown. The house was in terrible disrepair and still is, with holes going into the front room from the back garden. I contacted the council, Viola, and got wheelie bins provided for all 24 houses. Previous round black bins with lids on were only making the rodent problem worse. I also, within the first couple of years, started to complain to Newlon, my landlords, read the car park tarmac being dug up by massive tree roots. The roots had also broken pipes. I had found out that there was no trap in the sewer on the edge of Rolverden Place that comes onto Manor Road, which is council-owned. In 2005, following 5 burglaries in 1 week in Rolverden, with my house being one of them, I started the first Neighbourhood Watch meeting, which took place in my house, and Pauline Siddle, who runs Neighbourhood Watch, attended, as did a Newlon housing officer. However, Southern Housing did not attend. At the first meeting, it was decided that Met Crime Prevention Officer Eric Childs would come to Rolverden to do a site inspection. He did a full report and sent it to Southern Housing Group and Newlon Housing Trust. The recommendations were as follows. Some alleyways should be blocked off completely, gates to be put up at the front entrance, all boundary walls to be made higher, some trees to be felled and the rest to be pruned back regularly. Much more lighting was needed, as at night all we had was low lights, which most of the time did not work. The wall in front of my front door needed to be higher to prevent youths from Park Lane jumping it when police were chasing them. Apart from Southern Housing Group putting in some low lights and 2 lamps, 4 trees were felled in the main car park and it was re-tarmacked. Southern Housing refused to do anything else or follow the Met's recommendations. Briefly, since 2005, I and other neighbours have had to face youths 10 at a time with balaclavas on, trying to steal my neighbour's motorbike and other things. We've had major problems with fly tipping, whole household contents regularly being dumped, and that is outsiders doing that. But as we have no gates to stop people driving in or walking in, we get charged extra on our service charges by Southern Housing Group. We have drug dealers who have tried to serve Class A drugs in front of Councillor Bevan and Councillor Peacock when they came to attend the site to do a site inspection with Southern Housing Group. All this was also in front of 8 men working on the roof of housing for Southern Housing Group. The drug addicts used in front of terrified children going to and from school. They leave drugs, needles, human waste everywhere. At one stage, 2 cars were abandoned by Southern Housing Group's notice board. They had even lifted one of the cars out of it so they could place a chair there. For over 1.5 years, the cars stayed with drug addicts sleeping in them. Southern Housing Group refused to have them moved. The residents were being threatened. Adults and children were terrified. The police were short-staffed and unable to come even when 999 calls were made. Councillor Bevan eventually got the cars removed, not Southern Housing Group. Since my stroke in 2013, as my life-changing illnesses get worse, I'm finding it really hard to manage with the stress of living here. Some of you here tonight might wonder why I don't move. Simply because Haringey Council kindly granted me a DFG to adapt my home to meet my special needs. This cost Haringey £11,441.28, which was granted, dated the 30th of October 2014. I live with rheumatoid arthritis, epilepsy, COPD, asthma. In 2018, I was involved in a road traffic accident where a transit van reversed into my Motability car. Severe whiplash to neck, shoulders, spine, hips, fractured right rib, and 25 sessions of physio later, I was still very ill. After my accident, which was the 11th of June 2018, in August, I was assaulted inside my entrance in front of Nathan's wife by a lunatic that parked there, leaving his vehicle open for days and removed his registration number plates. Police did attend, but the male made off. Last year, in summertime, while driving out of Rolverden at 1:30 to go to a dentist, I saw 2 addicts taking Class A drugs inside our entrance. I stopped and told them to get out. The girl stood up and ran towards my car with a syringe in her hand. On December the 18th, 2019, I was further diagnosed with a life-changing illness with no cure called fibromyalgia. I am appealing to all of you here tonight to take action. Health, hygiene and fire risks need to be enforced. I believe that Haringey Council is obliged to enforce Southern Housing Group, Newlon and private landlords to deal with these very serious issues. They cannot continue to take rent and service charges while not giving us, the residents, a service. Their constant refusal to act and to blame each other while all washing their hands of the residents is an absolute scandal. We, the residents, are tired of living in filth, are terrified of coming in or out of Rolverden when knives have been found inside our entrance. We have had enough of slum landlords, be it private, Southern Housing Group or Newlon Housing Trust, who all do absolutely nothing to protect us. Since 2005, I have warned Southern Housing Group and Newlon that someone will be seriously hurt or die in Rolverden unless they take action. We cannot endure all the above mentioned, having managed to finally get into our houses in the evening and trying to go to sleep with rodents in the walls, ceilings, kitchens, whilst children and babies are living in these disgusting circumstances. It is unacceptable. As far as my house is concerned, as mentioned, Haringey has helped with the adapting, while Newlon absolutely refuses to help me or even send me their policy on disabled residents. They informed me that the policy is for their office use only, even though I am classed as vulnerable. At 60 years old, I can't do this much longer. I can't put up with prostitution going on inside my entrance in the afternoon when children are coming home from school and having to walk past customers in their cars with prostitutes giving them oral sex at 4 o'clock in the afternoon in front of the children. It is a scandal. I'm tired of Southern Housing Group refusing to issue gates, which I can hand round this evening. They did a quote. We were quoted 118,000 plus VAT, which, needless to say, the freeholders, leaseholders refused outright to pay for it. So at that point, I will leave it there and I will hand over to Nathan to read out a letter from a neighbour at number 17 and to add anything that I might have forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. So I'm going to read out a letter from Tina Atumnu. She is a private owner on the street, but as Southern Holt owns the street's freehold, she is therefore having to pay them costs for, well, basically atrocious stuff. It's also impacting me as a private tenant. My rent keeps going up drastically every time we have additional charges put on. Oh, yes, sorry. So, yes, I will read this letter. I've been I've been living at Rolverden Place since 2006 as a freeholder of my property. As a Haringey resident, I regularly pay my council tax. My council tax bill for 2019 to 2020 was £1,458.13, and my payments are up to date. The current status of Rolverden Place as a private road, which has always been managed by Southern Housing Group, based in Horsham, West Sussex. I am exceptionally concerned with the unsocial activities and environmental neglect going on the road. Drug peddlers, drug addicts, use needles, use condoms, mice, constant fly tipping of large refuse are common sights on Rolverden Place. In the afternoons and evenings when the school children walk home or They see strange-looking cars and adults loitering at the entrance to Rovenden Place. Coupled with the fact that in the evenings Rovenden Place is quite dark due to the lack of appropriate streetlights, this is quite frightening even for me as an adult, let alone young children. My 9-year-old says it's scary. Southern Housing Group are not doing anything to address any of these problems. They have refused to put up security cameras or appropriate gates to discourage drug peddlers or drug addicts coming to the road. The least Southern Housing did in 2018 was fell some trees, resurface the road, and each house was billed £1,173.68. The monthly service charge has always been £28.14, and on the 1st of May 2019, the service charge was reduced to £11.28. However, on the 1st of January 2020, Southern Housing debited every house on the road £435.86. When I inquired, Southern Housing said it was for the large refuse collection. Why would I pay for strangers to fly tip on my road? The huge fly tippings have resulted in rodents on the road, as well as Southern Housing have not treated the road against the rodent infestation. We have seen rodents about on the streets. In the present economic climate, people are struggling with household bills, and I do not believe Southern Housing should be allowed to use disclaimer to avoid being liable, even for dangerous activities going on the road. What happens if children begin to be approached by the drug peddlers, and who knows if the drug peddlers are armed? What happens if children begin to pick up the used needles and play with them if an adult is not nearby? What happens if fights break out between the drug peddlers for any reason? Is it possible that any resident coming back from either school or work will be walking into danger they know nothing about? I have repeatedly asked Southern Housing to approach Haringey Council to adopt Rovenden Place, but I am told the council does not want to adopt the road. My council tax should normally provide my street lighting, road sweeping, refuse collection, guttering system and emergency services. Beyond that, there are huge risks to public health should what is happening on Rovenden Place continue.
Okay, thank you. Could we have a copy of the letter and also your statement as well? Thank you very much for the time that you've taken to bring all of these issues to us, and sorry to hear that it's been going on for such a long time, and it doesn't look like you've had proper help to try and address some of these issues. However, I think it is much broader than what this panel has remit in terms of there are a lot of issues of antisocial behaviour. So what we will do, it's good that you have your ward councillor just beside you, so we will have to raise some of those issues, so, which is why it would be helpful to have the copy of your statement and also the letter. John, did you want to add anything? If you did, I'll have to restrict your time, though, because I'm very conscious of the time. We've also got the panel members to ask Alan any questions that they want to ask. So you have 1 minute.
Right. In my 17 years as a councillor, Rovenden Place has been a place that I've more dealings with than any other housing site. We've had MPs involved, the police involved, local councillors and officers from your housing department as well have been down there. Because Southern Housing has virtually no other property in Haringey, I think it might have one small unit somewhere else, this small estate is totally neglected because it doesn't get regular estate inspections. I think the last one was on the 25th of October. So having Newland, having some properties there as well, means there's a lot of confusion and duplication about what's going on and passing the buck. So Newland is one of our preferred housing partners, which means the council has chosen it to work with. So what would be a big improvement in my mind would be that the whole estate was managed by one housing association. Obviously Newland would be the best because it's nearest and it's got lots of property in Haringey. But it does have the smallest number of units, only 4. So Southern might say, well, it's more logical that we take your 4, but obviously this would have to be financially worked between both of them. And my preference would be that Newland would take that estate and manage it as one estate in Haringey where they've got all their resources based. I note, Alan, that you say you're establishing relationships with housing associations that have been a bit lost in the past, and they're trying to work with us and you're trying to influence them and they're keen to work with us. So I would ask that you could raise this issue at your next meeting and ask Southern and Newlon to basically get their act together. Let's get the estate managed by one provider. Hopefully Newlon would be my preference, and we can get some improvements to these issues that have been ongoing for a long time. Because I tell you this, I have to get involved every time to get anything done on this estate. And Southern are the worst, and Newlon are not much better, to be quite honest.
All right, thank you. Over to the panel members. Can I just remind you that you're responding to the report from Alan? So rather than responding to or commenting on what's been said about this particular state. So if you have any questions, please indicate. Stone?
Yeah, this is quite a specific question, but I'm quite curious as to how it's ended up that we have some housing association homes in our council blocks. I know I think there's some in Stroud Green, the ward that I represent, in one of the blocks, Chettle Court. So yeah, I'm wondering how that came about, and also it does seem to present some challenges for residents, council residents. So yeah.
It's not dissimilar to how it ended up being two housing associations here. What would almost certainly have happened in that case is the council tenants exercised the right to buy, bought a property, then at some point sold it on, and some housing associations were going around acquiring, Newlon did a lot of this, acquiring lots of former social rented homes that were put into the market. On this particular development in Rolverton, it was originally built, I believe, entirely for shared ownership. Everybody staircased out. Quite a few of them sold on, and then Newlon bought 4 of those properties, and Southern Housing Group bought 2 of the properties back themselves to manage. And to take the particular point on that, I know you say you want to talk about this. Southern Housing Group have no business being in this borough. They own 24 properties. It's pointless. They'll never pay any attention to those 24 properties. They own 30,000 across the country. What do they care about those 24 properties in Haringey? Whereas Newlon, they own properties basically in Haringey, Hackney and just in this area. And they're really big in this borough, and they really do care about this borough. So it would make much more sense if Newlon and Southern got together and they transferred it. I can't say that to Southern that the next group we have with housing associations, because they wouldn't turn up to that group. Why would they come to a borough where they only have 24 properties? But we do have good personal relationships with Southern from previous jobs, and we will talk to Southern and ask them why they aren't doing this. They did look at transferring this estate and selling this estate to another housing association back in 2014, I'm told, but that deal fell through, and they've not gone back and looked at it again. I mean, you know a lot more about this, Councillor Bevan, than I do. Short of that, it's quite, we can't force them out of our borough. We can't force them to rationalise. We haven't any levers to do so. But I'll certainly have a conversation with Southern and encourage them to think about looking at talking to Newlon, taking this on. Assuming Newlon actually want to take on the whole estate, and they might not do. Newlon currently are selling off quite a lot of the properties they bought, street properties in the borough, because they want to focus much more on the bigger developments and blocks they have, rather than their scattered street properties. So we're buying some back from Newlon at the moment, and Newlon may end up saying they want to lose these 4 as well.
Councillor Gordon.
I hear what you just said. However, I feel like we've sat here and we've listened to the most horrendous tales of, how these residents have been living. Now, it's not new to us because we come across this, in Tottenham Hale. I represent Tottenham Hale. But it's just dreadful, especially when you list it as a litany of just dreadful conditions you're putting up with. And I sort of feel that whether we can't, even if it's like taking on some casework, to see whether we can't, as a committee, to be putting in a letter to, have we not got any powers of our own enforcement officers that can go in and make some demands? Can we write to the police to have some plain clothes operation on this small estate? Because it does seem to be regularly, sort of confined to a small area. I do feel that we ought to take some quite sort of strong action, because these residents have come before us and, told us exactly what's going on, and it seems absolutely dreadful. And I don't want to sort of feel like we're just noting their comments, and maybe I think you'll probably say more than that, But I do feel that if we can write some letters, if Alan can report back to us maybe when he's had some discussion and maybe some correspondence with both Southern and with Newlon, and if we could have some action coming out of it. Sorry, Chair.
Can I just ask, has that ever been explored, what's being proposed this evening, that it should just be one housing association, and have we had that discussion?
Yeah, that discussion was had in about 2013, 14 and 15, as I was saying, well before my time here, when they were looking Southern Housing at moving out of the borough and selling their stock on. For whatever reason, that deal fell through, and they put it on the back burner and are no longer looking to rationalise their stock. So we could revive that discussion with Southern. What's interesting is I checked with our enforcement people, and they never had it referred to them for enforcement in our enforcement team to deal with these issues here. We tend to try not to take enforcement action against housing associations because they're supposed to be our partners, but we have done so in the past, and we will do so again. And I think it's one of the things we could use as a sort of leverage over Southern to say we will take enforcement action against them on this estate if they don't do something about thinking about rationalising their stock. But as I said earlier, I wouldn't say I'd guarantee that Newland would want to take it on. That is an issue. We'd have to find somebody that was. And because the important thing here is the majority of the estate is owned outright. 18 of the properties of the 24 have been bought by leaseholders, who are now owned by leaseholders now. Many of those are rented privately. And so actually, would a housing association want to take on 6 properties in a difficult to manage, because of the way it's built, environment with 18 leaseholders who could be quite difficult to them. So it might not be an easy sell to get one housing association to take it on.
Councillor Hare?
You've answered my question, actually. And I was going to say, could the council take on those properties in the same way as you're buying some street properties?
If they're offered us to buy, we'd look at them. They may not be viable for us to buy because of the prices that might be expected. Some Newland properties we bought, for example, we bought a number that they'd acquired on Broadwell Farm, but they were a viable acquisition for us to come back to. And Newland have recently got some properties around the edge of Northumberland Park, to the north of Northumberland Park, not to the south where you are, which they were offering to us, but the prices were just too high for us to make it work as social rented housing. So we could look at doing so, but it might be financially difficult for the council to do that.
Councillor.
Maybe I'm not understanding it correctly, but I think the problem as well is that there's a freeholder for the entire street and that it's a private street, and this whole kind of arrangement is problematic. I don't know whether we have any powers under our planning to prevent anything similar from happening again, but it just sounds like such a potentially bad thing to allow to happen in the borough if we had any. I know that's not much consolation to you, but for us as a council to look at how we stop that happening if it's within our power.
I have to admit, I don't understand very well the rules about adopting streets and what's an unadopted street and why, how that happens. Normally, in my experience, is these are sort of posh private streets where they don't want to be part of the council. This is a rather different experience. So I don't know. I'd need to go get advice on that and come back to you. It's not been within my my experience before.
Any other members? What I will say is that we will explore all the options available to us. But obviously, as you understand, that they're the housing associations, we are the council. We have some levers of influence over them, as Alan explained, and we'll explore everything that we can possibly do. And in terms of all of the other issues that you've brought to the table, as Councillor Gordon has said, we'll take those up as well and see what enforcement action can be taken to address some of the antisocial behaviour that's been persisting, and it sounds like it's been ongoing for very many years. So we'll work with your ward councillors. We've got John here, and we'll definitely have a think about what can be done. I didn't suggest that it's beyond our remit. I mean, obviously this is the Housing and Regeneration Scrutiny Panel. We're also councillors as well, so we'll definitely, beyond the scope of this panel, we'll also see what else we can do, and we'll definitely do that. I don't believe you have any further questions on this or anything else. So That just leaves me to say thank you very much for your time this evening. Do leave your statement and the letter, and we'll come back to you. We'll do something about it. We don't have any other formal agenda items. Is there any AOB? Is there anything that we wanted to raise? Yep.
I'd just like us to have another look at the fire safety review on the recommendations made by the OSC in light of some emails that I and other councillors have received.
So are you proposing that that is something that the parent OSC Overview Scrutiny Committee look at again, or what's your suggestion?
Can we look at that with them, perhaps, make some specific recommendations, or explore what's been recommended and why there are issues that residents are finding with that?
Okay, all right, so we'll certainly note that, and we'll see what we can take forward.
I think I'm right in saying that an update on that scrutiny is on the agenda for the main Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting next week. So there isn't. So I don't know how you can make that work, but there's certainly scheduled to be a kind of an update. I think our team has been involved in putting together a report to update on the implementation of the recommendations. So there is an opportunity in that meeting to get into some of those issues to the extent that that's helpful. Although you may want to pursue other options as well.
Okay, I think let's have a look at what's being discussed if it is on the agenda of next week's meeting, and then from that, Councillor Barnes, you can come back and suggest if there is anything further work that you would like this panel to do. We'll have a look at that. Otherwise, if there is no other item or no other AOB, we will conclude the meeting here. And thank you very much, everybody, for your participation this evening.